Now, today we are going to look into one of the most common things you need when it comes to web development. And that is, of course, developing a RESTful, stateless, JWT-based API. So today, let's quickly wrap it up like what are common use cases, right? So we have either like full stack developers, or we have this kind of like backend developer, and then a team that takes care of the front end. This is, in my experience lately, the more common setup. There's also this well, SPA approach to most projects, where you have a dedicated API that would handle your all of your database needs and authentication needs. And other than that, you have your website. So this what we're going to look today is not only a great starter point for somebody who wants to really dig in deep into the back end, as well as for the people that really don't want to bother too much with back end. This comes with like the most common features that you need, but it is based on LENKRAD core, which is something that we're kind of like been working on now for the past 3 months, I guess. It's a complete rewrite of Neon 3. At the moment, it's considered experimental, but it's at a point where I feel secure enough to use it in production. So the point is like, why wouldn't you? So let's jump into it and see how easy it goes. Oh yeah, right. So what's actually important to notice is that, so even if you are relatively new to PHP, this will feel relatively easy to use. If you're coming from a framework like Laravel, it will feel very approachable. If you are not too familiar with object-oriented programming yet, it is still easy enough for you to jump in. So this enables you to basically get started relatively quickly. What are the prerequisites? Let's start there quickly. It's a modern framework, and when I say modern, I really mean modern. So it's a rewrite, which means like we're not going to have those issues that other frameworks have, or frankly in Neon 3 as well, where backwards compatibility needs to be ensured, because there's old code, there are old plugins, there's a lot of stuff going on. And we can see with the really big things like let's say WordPress, like how cumbersome that can be to make, things. There's a huge library of stuff out there, right? You can't just, go into the screws of the heart and actually make things modern. This is different. This is something that will not run on anything less but PHP 8.1. So make sure that you have those capabilities. You need Composer with at least version 2. Anything else you need? Yes, for this example, we are going to assume that you either have SQLite or MySQL or MariaDB, or like a similar dialect on your system. I'm also going to make this a little bit interesting. Let's actually jump right into my full screen here. We are going to suffer together through a setup where I'm going to use a Windows machine with VS Code, and I'm going to use Insomnia as a little helper to kind of like test what we're doing here. So bear with me, especially with VS Code. I don't use this editor. I don't like this editor, but it's what you guys use. So let's suffer through it. So I'm going to simply go to a Documents My Websites thing. I have on this Windows machine XAMPP running, but it really doesn't matter. The important thing is that you have PHP 8.1. We're going to run everything out of in itself, right? So, and we're going to have SQLite. So let's open up a PowerShell here, and maybe let's look at quickly if we have the right kind of version of PHP. That's the case. And same with Composer. That is not the right command, but this is 2.3, so we're good. That's all we kind of need to know at this point. If you don't have that, please consult the internet. There are a gazillion ways of doing this. You can run this in Docker. You can have a virtualization on some kind of box. You can download WAMP, SAMP, MAMP, you name it. You can, if you're on a Mac, you know, there are homebrew installations. Like, I mean, just explore that to your needs. In our case, we assume that is done. Now let's go and actually have a look at what we're going to, and I actually have this open already, but that's fine. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of like walk through this installation together here. So I'm going to simply copy this command, execute it, and I'm actually not going to call this my app. I'm going to call this REST API so I can later know what project to delete. All right, that's basically it. Then I cd into it. This should kind of work the same on all systems. And then I'm not going to run PHP install from here. Instead, I'm going to open up the infamous VS Code. Okay, so I'm trying out a new resolution. Actually, let's forget about this stuff here. And let me remember. Is it that one? Yep. Again, please bear with me with VS Code. It's not my preferred way of working. Let's start with having a little bit of a look. So this is a little bit small here, but I think if I remember correctly, yeah, this should be big enough. Features purchasing a license. Yeah, I don't think so. Okay, so what do we have here? Let's kind of like see what the setup is, right? So with LENKRAD, you're extremely free to structure your application the way you want to structure it. We don't, in those starter kits, that's always the case. There's an opinion already in existence. So let's look at this logically. So you find this folder public. This is the actual web root, right? This is the access point and the only thing that eventually is going to be exposed to the web should we decide to deploy it. You can see there's an htaccess file should you host on Apache. We don't need to worry about any of this right now. Let's start by looking at the index. Pretty normal stuff, right? So we're loading the, oh, interesting that this is in here. We don't need it. We're going to start by loading our composer to do the auto load, and then we define 3 paths. One would be the app path. That's, as you can see, that's the source folder. So this is where all of our stuff is happening. The public path, which is ourselves, and the CLI path, which is the root path, if you want. So of this, the reason it's called CLI path is because that is how, in relation, our CLI tool is referenced, but you might as well call this the root path. So then we are using attribute routing. What that means is something we're going to look in a second. We are going to bootstrap. This is how this starter pack basically loads the configuration, and then app run, and that's it. So needless to say, those 2 lines are optional. It is for this particular setup something that we're going to do. What does this bootstrap do? Well, not that much. This is something we don't really need. This is just for the demo page, so to speak. Then we're just going to set up a new database and new authentication, both things that I will find here. So this database does not that much, right? So in the construct, we say we're going to use SQLite. The reason why the setup's chosen is so this actually runs out of the box. What does that mean? It means it's supposed to be used immediately, but if should you want to use an actual SQL connection, then do so. What you need to do is to jump into your env, which was not copied because we have not run the installation. We should probably just follow this for now, huh? Let's do that. All right. Now we should have this. And as you can see, a SQLite database was created. This is not possible to open this in VS Code. It's a binary file, but it's our database. An env is created. We can make changes here as we see fit, especially here probably. And then let's jump back to this, right? We could, of course, instead say, hey, we want everything to work with MySQL instead of SQLite, but we're going to actually run this now, which means if I were to copy this over, PHP dev, you can see I can directly run this here, and this is what's happening. Let me make this a little bit smaller so we can actually look at this nicely side by side. Okay, so, right, this is something we could ignore for now and say, okay, we're going to use a SQLite database just so we have this for now. Let's also forget that. So as you can see, those, should you want to switch over, this is what you kind of need to add to your env for it to work. Otherwise, it's going to take the default values, and don't write your actual public like live stuff in here. If you want to work with version control, that's the kind of stuff you would actually find in you know, on your GitHub repository and so on. Don't do that. Always handle your secure things in the env file. So far, so good. Now, what are we looking at here, right? So this is normally not intended to be something that actually renders a web page. So this is just a little bit of a example here, and we're going to have a little bit of a dive in here. So in our source, you will find the folder example. In the example, you will find the folder API and web. Let's look at web first. Home. So here you can see there is the web route attribute, right, which basically means this is a get that renders a web page, so server-side rendering web page. The path is nothing, so basically on home, so to speak, and we're rendering example web, example HTML, which is this file. There's no bigger setup in this scenario for any kind of you know, general layout, frame, whatever you want to call it. So the complete HTML is just, see, it starts with a doc type in one file. This is all that this project is doing. Oops, where are we here? Okay, so far so good. How does this work? Just a little bit of an understanding. So I'm returning an array here for probably no reason whatsoever, just to show that it works. This example home controller is something that you will find over here, which basically means if I were to say test, right, it would show up here. So what's the rest of this? And this is something that, oh God, so sorry if this is not my IDE. As you can see, this is how you would actually use it, but this is not a tutorial on how to do server-side rendering, so we're going to ignore all of that as just a little bit of a reminder. The actual interesting thing happens in our example API. So here you see, okay, this is one of those any route things. So this reacts to get, to post, to put, and to delete, with the interesting thing here that the delete requires a login. So you can just chain middleware here. Let's look at how this works so we have a little bit of understanding. So let's just call this for now, right? So if I were to go to, actually, let's just duplicate this and then say, hey, I want to go to API example, right? Then you can see, okay, I'm returning an array. It has description, method, payload, query, and parameter. The standard behavior is to answer as a JSON. This is exactly what you see is happening here. So we have this description, then the method. Okay, we cannot influence that when we use the browser. There's a payload. We can also not send anything to that if we use the browser. But query is, for example, something we could do, right? We could basically say, hey, sum is name, and you would see all of a sudden it understands, hey, there is some name. Actually, let me make that a little bit bigger for you. Probably easier to see. Ooh, this is extreme, but sure, why not? Then we have parameters. You will see that on your right here, right? So we're here in get at the moment. So with a colon, in our case, starts the parameter routing. And when you see a star in the back, it means this is so either this parameter is set or not. In our case, it's not set. So if I wanted to say Tom, then you can see my parameter now is Tom, right? So this is how I named the parameter, and this is how I reference the parameter, right? So here you can basically see the request has inputs. This is basically what I get from sending post or put or push requests. This is get query, so this is how I get my query string and get parameter. So all of those, maybe this is interesting to know, all of those either have a singular, right, or a plural. So I could be very specific here. I could basically say, hey, I'm not talking about all queries. I just want to have the query let's call it name. Okay, now if I refresh this, you'll see this is empty. There's null. But if I say, well, but if I had a name is Tom, then you will see it is filled with Tom, right? So this is what we could kind of do here. Let's ignore all of this for now and make this our get all queries again. Okay, let's do one more thing. I'm going to leave the Tom in the parameter and then remove this little star here. If I do this now, it still works. But now if I choose not to have a parameter, this route doesn't exist anymore, right? So this only reacts to this exact thing. So if I say, hey, this is just optional, then we again get our regular return as expected. Okay, so that's a little bit for how routing works and how to get the requests out. But that's already a little bit complicated, so let's jump back to our little starter project here and walk through this tutorial here. So a lot of things work with the CLI. So since over here I'm running my server, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new terminal to have the old one running, and then I'm actually going to follow this bit by bit. So PHP CLI create controller. By the way, the reason this is called CLI, you can name this whatever you want, is because we simply called this file CLI. See, this is a simple PHP file, and you can call this whatever you want, and it does something similar to the index PHP. The only difference is that we're running a console application rather than letting the app run itself. Right, that's basically the big difference. And we're going to say create controller, app, movies, get movies. Okay, let's do this quickly and then see why. So in my source, there is now a folder movies, and there is a get movies controller in there. See that? So we declared that by namespace. As you can see, that's our namespace. Where would that be defined? Well, another choice that this thing made, you can name this whatever you want, but this is in the autoload. This is what it was set up to as app and config. So one would be the source and one would be the config folder. Right, that is why it works like that. Should you make changes to that, don't forget to run composer dump autoload to refresh the autoloader composer is using. Okay, so we have this created, so let's close all of those. Go back to our get movies. Now, this does not have a route yet, right? So what we're basically seeing is something that looks quite similar to our example PHP. So just basically how it generates this little starting point here. we cannot route to this because we have not defined a route. So here in our tutorial on the left, you see, okay, simply have to give the class this, oops, for it to work. So now add movies should already return this. Let's try that out. So we're going to go to API movies, and you can see name get movies. That's exactly what I return here. Okay, so far so good. Now you might wonder, why is this so cumbersome here? Well, that's a very good question. We should probably make this a little nicer here. Okay, now if I remember correctly, let's see if it's got smarter. Did it? Yes, it did. Okay, cool. So meanwhile, we don't have to write it like that anymore. Even VS Code is smart enough nowadays to do that. Awesome. Okay. So our get works, and then, okay, well, we already did this, right? It says, well, check if it works. It does work. Let's create a post endpoint as well. Let's do that. Same thing. I run the create controller. Create movie in that case. We're going to generate that in the same folder. This is maybe something you might reconsider. This is just a little bit of a show. Like, do you see how, like, the example and the auth, you do that differently? Like, they say, okay, so the API endpoints are an API. With example, you could see that there's API endpoints and there's web endpoints. So they keep that a little bit separated. Here, everything is put in one place for now. Again, make up your mind how you want to do that. We're going to just follow this tutorial for now, and then consider how we want to set up our actual project. Now, that's our post endpoint, right? It's the create movie. So we are going to say, all right, post, and this is going to be API movies. And then we're kind of good. And yep, we did that. And now it's time to create an actual model. Now this is actually where, personally, I find the beauty comes in. So instead of create controller, I say create model. It creates this file also in here, right? We have this movie model. We gave it the same namespace, so it's ending up at the same thing. And this kind of starts with a relatively simple system here. It only has a primary key. That's fine. We're going to give it, what do they say here? Name and director. Fair enough. Let's do that. So we're going to say public string name and public string director. Now, the beauty of the LENKRAD core is that you only have one file that manages your database setup, your migrations, and your object relation. So that makes it very, very simple, and it means that things will kind of work without any kind of problem whatsoever. Now, I can run this, and everything will be fine. There's no further steps I need to do. Let's do this for now, and then we jump into a little bit of more details. So I'm going to basically run this PHP CLI migrate models, and I have to add the dialect, in this case, SQLite. Okay, and you can see it generated, it ran two SQL commands. So one is basically we're going to create this movie model table. And then the other one is there's a user model already in place, and it ran that again in case you had some updates on that. So since we cannot look at the database without additional software or some kind of extension, well, let's forget about that. Let's rather look, well, let's fly blind. I'm going to just tell you. So it defaults on certain things, right? So if I set a string, it's going to, from a database perspective, and you can see that here nicely, use it as text. See that? So the int created an integer, as you can see, and the string created a text. The primary key that you see here is something that is happening because of this attribute, and there are a bunch of attributes at your disposal to handle this. So I highly encourage you to look into this deeper. I could, for example, decide manually on certain things. So I could, for example, say, yes, this is actually a particular type. The type is, I don't know what, long text. Or I could say this is actually a date. So to reference the database, I could basically declare something as a is unique or is foreign key, and all kinds of things that I can do. Again, I don't want to jump into this right now. Just keep in mind that basically you have a lot of things that you do. Actually, one of those examples that we probably want to look at is the user itself. Yeah, here you see it nicely, right? So this is our primary key. The email is set to unique. The password is set to automatically transform in and out on hash. We're using particular traits to create like delete dates, update stamps, and so on. And in this case, there's a login function attached to it to have an easier access. But we don't need to worry about any of this right now. What we do need to worry about is to finally get me to shut up and move on with this tutorial. Okay, so let's revisit our create movie control and apply the following changes. That's exactly what we're going to do. So of course, instead of this, we want to actually paste this. That is really weird long one-liner. Let's pick it apart, I guess. Okay. So we can now create a couple of movies, and I'm not going to use it here. What I'm actually going to do is going to open up Insomnia. Where is this going to? App movies. This is the get call. I also want to kind of rename this to get movies, and then quickly have another request here that we're kind of going to copy from here. This is going to be a post, and we're going to call this great movie. Yep. And we're going to create a JSON with a little bit of so we need what did we call it? Name. Let's say Kill Bill, and we're gonna have a director that's going to say Tarantino. Oops, something is wrong here. Okay. Yep, that's basically how we're going to do it. Now I'm going to actually execute this now, right? And then see what's happening. Okay, so as you can see, what I get back is a 200 success, and there is the ID 1 in our database with the name Kill Bill and the director Tarantino. So why and how does this work? Let's pick up those parts of code here. So I'm creating a new movie where I say retrieve one or create. So first of all, let's make this a little bit nicer here because this looks ugly. So we can write just request here. Okay. Now let's start by getting the inputs. As you can see, I'm running this request, get inputs. We've seen that from the example already, which is fine. And I'm going to simply return this for now, just to make it clear what's happening. So if I send this again, see, I see get my inputs back. Now, then here, I could, of course, simply say, hey, this is all I need to place in here, right? Is the inputs. And this would again work if I got rid of this return here. So let's talk about two things. The first thing is like, okay, what would happen if it is some form of malicious payload that I'm getting, right? So that's not really a concern, because should this be not correctly malformed, all of this is going to throw an error. And the way that the matching works in the models will also prevent you from being able to, like, no keys or so are exposed. So there's no way to kind of like make any kind of injection attempts or whatever. But of course, error handling is then something you need to worry about. Now, when I call retrieve one or create, the reason that is done here is a little bit of a trick. So do you remember how in the user model there was the possibility to declare something unique and so on? Like, none of this is happening in the simple example tutorial here, right? So what we're basically doing is, okay, we're going to retrieve an existing model should the combination of name and director already exist. So if the next request that we can actually see that nicely if I just fire this again. Yeah, that's actually exactly what we're going to do. To see how I still get ID 1 out, that's because we did not create a new entry. The database automatically understood, hey, this is already in existence. I'm going to simply reply with with the model that I already know. What kind of systems we have here is something we're going to look into in a different way. So there's always the generic way of going about a model. Let's simply create a new movie here now and say, actually, we could also do it like this and say there's a new movie model. And the new movie has particular things. Ooh, what I kind of hate about VS Code. Okay. There it understands. Okay, so it knows it has a name. Right, so this could be, of course, if we want to be precise, something like our request get input name, right? If this is how we want to write it, and then in the next line, do our new movie director. You get the gist of it, right? And I'm not actually going to write this now because it's kind of stupid. And if I wanted to basically sync it with the database, then I would basically have to run the store method to actually save it to the database. Okay, so that's how I could go about it. I could actually throw this in here as well directly if I wanted to, like that, and then generate it from there. I could also use modern PHP features. So for example, let's move this down, write maybe a match condition and say, hey, from our request inputs, match name to new movie name, and match director to new movie. Right? I could do that. But this is honestly just, showing you all the different things that you can do to basically go about this. I'm just encouraging you to kind of like figure out what is smart to do when and where and so on. For us right now, oops, you're going to simply do it that and say this is request get inputs, and then have our inputs here, and we're going to basically leave it like this. Do you see how the store works here? So I can directly chain this, of course. The reason why this is not really happening, I hope you don't hear that stupid lawnmower out there. super loud, is that you can see this will actually now fail, right? So if I were to send this, right, there's actually a problem in this. Why? Because we're actually not in the right kind of type. So what are we doing here? We're returning a movie model, not an array. So with strict typing, you need to make sure that that's actually what we are sending out. If you make that change, then you can see I cleaned up the code a little bit to make it more readable and easy, and also more logical to return a model. So the data normalization process of the JSON response will take care of this automatically. So far, so good. Let's see. So we created now what? Let's create 1 or 2 movies. Okay, fair enough. Let's maybe create a second one. The name is My Movie, and the director is me. Send that over, and you can see now I get a new ID, right? Because now we don't know what we're talking about, so we created a new movie, so we have 2 movies now. Okay, then we don't need the 2 array thing, and that's actually all we need. Wait a second, where is the... Oh yeah, get movies, exactly. So what do we want to do here? Here we want to do movie model retrieve. Do the same here. So instead of basically saying, hey, we're going to convert this to an array, or let's do that for now, I guess. So it works. Let's switch over to, no, not that one, to our Insomnia here. And go over to our get movies, send this request, and you can see I get a list of those movies that I created. And now I can start to do things that are a little bit more interesting. So first of all, what happens if I remove this, right? So same thing, this is not an array anymore. Well, what is it? It is a collection. And you can see it still works the same. I can do things like, let's just say my movies have an additional parameter page. Okay, so this will still work like that. And I can basically say, hey, I want to paginate my results. And I'm going to say this is from request get parameter page 1 and a length of, I don't know what, 20 movies per page. Do it like this, which again, I can switch back to array. Okay, which will return me a paginated result. You see how it says page 1 and the page size is 20? I have a total of 2. So 2 results, which means there are a total of 1 pages that I can do this, right? So we should probably do this really weird and say we want to have only 1 result per page, which is too little, right? This wouldn't... I don't think that limiter can go that low, can it? Get the collection itself. Okay. This is something you have to try out when you move over to MySQL, because the limiting, it's the same with the case insensitiveness of the database and so on. So the SQLite has a lot of restrictions where you have to kind of like be a little bit careful with what you expect, but that's fine for us now. So we're going to ignore that and run an order by instead, maybe. Not, but just so you know what kind of capabilities I would have. So I could probably do something like sending, and could say by ID. Same thing with descending. I could add a condition to my pagination of where name is, I don't know what, Tarantino, or maybe something that I get from query. I mean, you know, you can get creative as you want to. The point being, though, that let's actually return to the original state here, is that our movie model retrieve, and then here's change it back to collection, is something that is now a public API, which is kind of like interesting, but probably not what we want, right? So let's say, hey, we're going to actually require login, requires login class. Okay, now it understands it. Why we're doing this? If we fire it against it now, then basically we have an unauthorized C401 response, because we're not allowed to use this endpoint unless we have a valid JSON web token. So let's look at that. So we have the auth, and I prepared this already. So let's go into the API and look into the register. So API auth register, that's what we want to fire against. And that would create a new user for us, right? That's exactly what we're going to do. You see, I prepared it here already with sam@email.com and the password. I'm actually going to send a request against this, and the answer is already a token. See that? So I'm going to copy this token. Now, in your web application, you would, of course, just add that to your Axios credentials, right, as an authorization header. For in our case here, if I say auth test, I can simply paste it here and make life a little bit easier for us. So if I now click send against the me endpoint, right, then do you see how it says provided auth? That's basically what I get back. So this is the content of my JWT if I'm authenticated. What does this provided do? Let's look at this maybe. So this requires login is something, if we look at the middleware of auth, to see how you can endlessly chain those middleware functions. So I get provided in, and what I return is added to the provided, right, to what I basically have here. So I return this auth, which means that whatever uses it, where's my me? I closed it. Whatever uses it now has this in provided, right? That's relatively simple. And that's how I can basically read it. So if I were to go over to our get movies, and actually copy the same thing here. Oops, I need to somehow, okay, get movies. So again, let's try it. This doesn't work, but if I say, hey, this has a bearer token, and I send it again, you can see now I can all of a sudden access this endpoint, because in the authorization, you can basically see that in the headers. Well, this doesn't show you, but that's what's actually happening maybe here. Really, this doesn't really show the raw headers. Okay, but what's actually happening under the hood is you sent this request with an authorization header, and that's how that works. So that's basically it. I know, once again, should you have devised one of my tutorials before, it's always like that, right? So I wanted to make this a 5-minute thing. All of a sudden, we're ending up talking about kind of everything. But you should be able to actually reproduce what we've been through today within 5 minutes. The actual setup of making this work, actually running through this tutorial, is something that kind of works out of the box, and it will enable you to rapidly go through several or generate models as you need. You can connect models if you want to jump into the LENKRAD core definition. Actually, this is something that I should definitely leave you with before I say goodbye. So the the Neon.io LENKRAD core, I will drop that link as well, is something that you should basically look into, right? If I look into models, you will see that, okay, those are all the different kinds of things that you could do. Here, there have many relationships. See, if I say, no, this is a collection, which means there's another model, and so on, and so on, and so on. You can set this to read only. You can have the different table name. There's all kinds of things that are possible when you're working with models, and how do you connect them, how you create them. When it comes to routing, like how's that done? Here's the pagination. We kind of walked through different forms of migrating. You can migrate a particular model if you want to, right? You can write it to file migration files. You can run backups. You can, so for dumps, basically, all kinds of things. How you write your own CLI command to add to the CLI. I mean, you name it. How dynamic stores. I mean, there's so much, like event handling. This is for templating, something we don't need in our case here. So read this if you have any kind of questions. See, this is like, you can define routes, not by attributes, but actually controlled if you want to. It's on and on and on. So that's something that you can basically look into. But I think what this tutorial showed nicely is this kind of like works relatively easy, like to handle the basic understanding of how this framework works is something that really requires not too much of a deep dive. It's quite easy. You always have a way out, right? Like you can make raw database calls if needed to. You can return data normalizations of your own. I mean, there's almost endless possibilities of how to do this, but the nice thing is you don't have to. What I would recommend, of course, is should you take any of those things live, to actually use something else than SQLite. SQLite is a little bit of a pain point from a magnitude of perspectives. So do use a real database. We talked about this in the beginning a little bit of how to go about it. You should be able to simply run a migration, and then whatever worked for your SQLite will work for your MySQL database. So yes, enjoy, have fun, and most of all, I hope it helps. If it does, let me know. There's this comment section on wherever you're seeing me that would allow you to give some feedback. Other than that, I see you around.